Warning.
A lot of really bad things are going to happen. Stock prices crashing, bond prices crashing, real estate prices crashing, bankruptcies. If you spend 10% of your income on food and the price of food doubles, and now you got to spend 20% of your income on food and you were living paycheck to paycheck, what are you going to give up in order to afford to eat? There's really no easy way out of it. There's just a bad way and a worse way. And unfortunately, we're choosing the worst way. Bitcoin was really shoved down everybody's throat and massive money spent to convince people to buy basically nothing, worthless tokens. The real money was getting rid of Bitcoin. The average person who bought Bitcoin in 2021 is way down on that buy because ultimately it doesn't have any value. So a lot of people are going to get wiped out on the way down in crypto.
Before we dive in, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Peter Schiff, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Rob, for inviting me on your show.
Now, I thought we'd do something a bit different because I know you've been on everywhere. I know you've been on Joe Rogan a lot and done many interviews. And I thought, how can I make it a bit more interesting for Peter, who's been interviewed everywhere? So if it's okay with you, we're going to do 5 rounds. And round one will be and crashes. Round 2 will be economics and money. Round 3 will be politics and Peter Schiff. Round 4 will be Bitcoin and billionaires. And round 5 will be quick fire and fun. So
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
Sure. Those are some nice titles. So the problem is, we're sidelining such a large percentage of the population. They're not working, but they continue to consume. And the problem there is that governments are trying to offset the damage that they're doing by shutting businesses down and forcing everybody not to go to work. Obviously, if you're not going to work, you're not earning a paycheck. And so, you're going to have a recession. But what the government is doing is they're saying, well, we don't want the recession. We just don't want people to work. So let's print up a bunch of money and send it out to all these people who aren't working so they can keep on spending. Even though they don't have a paycheck, we'll give them a stimulus check. And now they can keep shopping. And so the economy will keep going. But, you can't consume if you don't produce. And if all you produce is paper money, then what you're going to get is inflation. And that's what we have. And you can see prices are going up rather substantially all around the world. And that is going to continue. In fact, it's going to accelerate as we continue to move down this disastrous policy path.
Rise in inflation, rise in prices, cost of living, etc. What's that going to do to the economy and how long do you think that's going to last?
Well, it's certainly going to be very problematic for average people. If you're very, very wealthy, it won't impact you as much. If the cost of eating doubles, eating is such a small part of your overall budget that you may not even notice it. But if you spend 10% of your income on food and the price of food doubles, and now you got to spend 20% of your income on food and you were living paycheck to paycheck, what are you going to give up in order to afford to eat? And the same thing with energy, same thing with your rent. If or insurance or all these costs are going up, it's going to have a much bigger impact on middle income, lower income, and even more so than workers, it's retirees who are living on fixed incomes. Because at least if you have a job, you could get a raise. Maybe your raise won't keep up with inflation, but maybe it'll get you 80% of the way there. So you're going backwards, but you're able to offset some of the increasing price with a higher wage. But if you're not working for a wage, if you've got a fixed income, you don't offset any of the inflation. So it's a huge decline in your standard of living. And it's hard to know how much a lot of the inflation will show up in the official government statistics, because I think that we measure inflation inaccurately. I think prices are going up a lot faster than most government indexes would reveal. So if you just look at the numbers, you won't realize, how sick the economy is. It's like if you got a thermometer that's broken and it always reads 98.6, no matter what your actual temperature is. If you just look at that thermometer and just conclude that you're okay and ignore, the symptoms, you're sweating, or whatever. You're obviously got a fever, but you're looking at some broken thermometer and thinking that you're okay. You got to look at reality and not, what the government is telling you. And I think more people are going to experience this, and they're going to realize that despite what the politicians are assuring them, their situation is deteriorating.
So in the UK, there's a tax called VAT, value added tax on all products you buy, services you buy, most of them at 20%. They haven't reduced that. There's corporation tax, which has gone up from 19% to 25%. So that's a 30-odd% increase. Income tax, 45% at the top bracket. National insurance has gone up 12.5%. So taxes are either staying the same or going up. Yet cost of living is going up and an ability to trade and produce is going down. Is it similar in the US, and what needs to be done?
Yeah, well, on a federal level, there hasn't been a big increase in taxation, but I think on local levels, state and local governments may have been. Some states have raised taxes and some probably municipalities. But I think in the US, most of the additional government is being paid for by printing more money. So instead of raising our taxes and taking our money, they're printing more money and taking our purchasing power. And so Americans are paying for the cost of government through a higher cost of living. So because the government is printing up so much money and spending it or giving it to other people to spend, prices go up. And so now everybody can afford to buy less because the prices of everything they're buying are so much higher. And that represents a tax. Because if prices are higher and you can afford less stuff, the stuff that you can no longer afford was basically taxed away from you.
So what's the solution to this?
Well, to stop creating money, stop causing inflation. But that would result in a lot of other short-term problems like stock prices crashing, bond prices crashing, real estate prices crashing, financial crisis, bankruptcies, defaults. A lot of really bad things are going to happen if the Fed stops creating inflation. But of course, even worse things are going to happen if they keep creating inflation. So there's really no easy way out of it. There's just a bad way and a worse way. And unfortunately, we're choosing the worst way.
So I guess it reminds me of the sort of Austrian versus Keynesian thought process of economics. Minimum intervention would be Austrian, Keynesian would be more governmental intervention. Where would you sit on that?
Well, I'm obviously an Austrian, but the Keynesians today aren't even Keynesians. I mean, Keynes wouldn't even be a Keynesian today, because at least Keynes, and I disagree with his theories, but at least he understood that over time, budgets have to be balanced. So Keynes's idea was that during times where the economy is weak, the governments would stimulate the economy by running deficits. And then when the economy recovered and was strong again, they would run surpluses to pay off the debts that were run up when the economy was weak. And so that over the course of a total business cycle, the government national debt would not rise. It would just go up for a while and then come back down. But today, we run deficits during good times and then even bigger deficits during bad times. So there's never a surplus to pay off anything. And even Keynes knew that you can't borrow indefinitely, that you got to pay the piper. Well, we think that we're going to get a free ride, but we're in for a rude awakening. 2008 financial crisis, are oblivious to this one, even though it's even bigger. But the causes are the same. I mean, it's the same bad policies that have caused the problems that have sown the seeds for the next crisis.
Some people call you Dr. Doom. Do you think that's fair?
I haven't really been called Dr. Doom in a while. I mean, they started calling me Dr. Doom back on CNBC when I was coming on in 2005 and 2006, warning about the housing bubble and the coming financial crisis. And they called me Dr. Doom because of that. And I used to say, well, I'm Dr. Reality. And as it turned out, I was right. I mean, the crisis that I was warning about that earned me that moniker happened. And so I was Dr. Reality. They were the ones that were living in a fantasy world. I was just trying to, bring reality into the conversation. And the same thing I'm warning today about a much bigger financial crisis, currency crisis that is waiting for us here. And you can call me Dr. Doom if you want, because I am forecasting some economic doom for a lot of people, but it's not because I just want to make that forecast. That's what's there. That's what I see, because I understand the errors that the central banks and governments are making, and I know what the ramifications are. Just like I knew that when Greenspan was in charge, inflating the housing bubble. But the powers that be did not. They thought we were enjoying genuine prosperity, and I knew they were wrong. And the same thing is happening again. This is an artificial bubble inflated by central banks, the Fed in particular. And, the crisis that we have, laid the foundation for is now much greater than the one back then. But of course, the same people who were oblivious to the coming 2008 financial crisis are oblivious to this one. Even though it's even bigger. But the causes are the same. It's the same bad policies that have caused the problems that have sown the seeds for the next crisis.
So when do you think the next crisis is coming? How big and how bad do you think it will be, and how long do you think it will last? Well,
I think the balls are already in motion, because, we had this big increase in consumer prices in 2021. We get the official CPI numbers, I think, on Wednesday here, but it's going to show that prices were up 7%, maybe a little bit more, during 2021. That would be the highest rate, I think, since 1982-ish. But, if we still measured prices the way we measured them in 1982, we would have, reported about a 15% increase in consumer prices, which would make it worse than any individual year during the 1970s or 1980. So this was a horrible year of inflation, and I think this is, really the beginning of the end, because now the Fed can no longer justify 0% interest rates and quantitative easing. It needs to raise interest rates, and it's now talking about raising interest rates, and it may in fact raise them. We'll see. It may not just talk, it may actually do it. But the problem is, even the rate hikes they're talking about are too small and too late to make a difference. Because the Fed is talking about raising interest rates maybe to 1% by the end of the year, and then maybe to 2% by the end of next year. Well, we got 7% inflation. You can't raise rates to 1 or 2%. Rates need to be higher than the rate of inflation if you want to slow the rate of inflation. So interest rates need to go, 10%. But of course, we can't even get near 10%. We can't even get to 5%. We have so much debt because of all the past money printing and all the stimulus of the Fed. They have created a situation where it's impossible to fight inflation, and so they won't do it. And that's going to be the seeds of the next crisis, because as the Fed is, tightening up on its monetary policy to make it less loose, right? We're not going to have tight money. We're just going to have money that's less loose than it was before. The problem is less loose is not enough to sustain the asset bubbles, in a lot of these financial assets. So we get a crash, but it's not tight enough to actually bend the inflation curve. And so inflation is going to keep getting worse, even as the Fed is hiking rates supposedly to fight it. That's going to lead to stagflation. That's ultimately going to cause the Fed to reverse course and start easing again, even though inflation will be worse than when it started its tightening campaign. And somewhere along the way, the markets are going to wake up to this reality, and the dollar, or the bottom rather, is going to drop out of the dollar, and then we're going to have a currency crisis that will morph into a sovereign death crisis, and then it's all over. Then we have a real collapse, because then the Fed has to let interest rates go way up, and everything comes crashing down in a much more spectacular way than '08, except nobody gets bailed out. Everybody has to suffer the losses in their entirety, and they'll be much bigger. Or they don't have the guts to do that, and they just keep printing money anyway, and they print the dollar into oblivion, and we have hyperinflation, which of course would be even worse.
Okay, so Peter, you wrote a book called How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. And you also wrote a book called Crash Proof and Crash Proof 2.0. So,
And the real crash. That's the more recent one.
And the real crash.
Yeah.
So you've written a lot of books on this subject. So now let's turn into how can we combat this impending crash? How can we maybe even benefit? What upside opportunities are there? How can we prepare for it?
Yeah, well, those are good questions. We certainly can't prevent it. Politicians and central bankers have delayed it. They've done a very good job at delaying it, but there's a heavy price to be paid for that delay because delaying it makes it worse when it happens. But that's okay for most politicians because if it happens on somebody else's watch, well, then it's somebody else's problem. But, the public, I'd rather do the right thing now and get the pain over with than, keep doing the wrong thing and then ultimately have an even more painful experience. But on an individual basis, if you recognize what is going to happen and understand what's already happened, you can position yourself on a personal level to profit from what's going to unfold. There's always going to be winners and losers. In every economic crisis, there are winners. There are a lot of losers, and the losers, there's a lot of stories about the losers. It's very high profile, but fortunes are made during those times. A lot of people made fortunes during the Great Depression. They were able to buy up assets on the cheap that they never would have been able to buy but for those circumstances. And that later ended up being, a springboard to incredible wealth. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people to get rich while a lot of other people are going broke, right? So the question is, how do you avoid going broke and stay rich if you're already rich, or maybe get richer, or maybe get rich if you're not rich now? How can you take advantage of the circumstances? And I think what you need to do is you need to understand all of the artificially inflated assets and get out of those. So don't own the stuff that's going to crash, but own the things that are going to rise in value when all that stuff crashes. Get out of the most overvalued currencies and into more fairly or better valued currencies. Or better yet, get out of currencies completely and own real money, own gold and silver. But own assets in countries, emerging markets, whose economies will benefit from what's about to happen. Certain asset classes and businesses will thrive in this environment. Because I think if the dollar crashes, the way I believe, Americans are going to substantially reduce their spending. And right now we have these record trade deficits. The world is sending a lot of goods to America that we can't afford and we didn't produce. But those are goods that the world produced, and they don't get to consume those goods. They sent them over here to America, and we got them. And what did we give the producers? We gave them pieces of paper. We printed up some money and gave it to them. Well, when that money crashes, they're not going to want it anymore. So all that merchandise isn't going to be shipped over to the United States. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop producing it. It just means somebody else is going to consume it. And so try to figure out who is going to consume what Americans are too broke to consume. And start investing in those economies where standards of living are going to rise and costs of living are going to go down. Because the world has been supporting the United States for decades. And that's been a big burden. And when that burden is no longer there, it's a huge windfall for the rest of the world, because now instead of having to support America, they free up those resources to invest in their own economies. They have all those goods that now they can consume that previously were being diverted for American consumption. So Americans suffer, right, because our ride on the global gravy train is over. We can't just consume anymore without producing, but the rest of the world has been producing. They just haven't consumed it all because they've sent their stuff here. So I think there's going to be big changes in the global economy, the global pecking order, relative values of currencies and assets and incomes. And I think if you're on the winning end of that transfer, you can do very well. I mean, I think I've positioned myself, I think I've positioned my clients to be on the winning end of that transfer. And we're just, sitting back and just, watching it happen and waiting for it to play out.
So I've just developed an apartment block, 159 tenant units. Mm-hmm. And my plan with that was to hold it forever. I've bought some Bitcoin, though, probably maybe less than 5% of my wealth. My plan was to hold that forever. Like to buy nice gold watches. My plan was to hold them forever. Is there an argument that you should just buy a fundamentally good asset and just never sell it?
Well, when it comes to your apartment complex, if you've got a good rental income from that complex, then there's no reason why you can't hold it because it's continuing to generate income for you. You're getting rent from your tenants. So as long as you have tenants and they're willing to pay rent, and your rents, exceed the cost of, maintaining the property taxes, insurance, maintenance, you have a good cash flowing asset, then you don't need to sell it. Now, obviously, if something got very expensive, if somebody offered you a price that was way out of line with that income that you're generating, you might consider selling it and investing the money someplace else where you can get a better return. But as long as the real estate is throwing off income, or maybe you can move into one of the apartments yourself. I mean, you can use it, or you can have family members stay there. I don't know. I mean, it's real. So yeah, you could hold that forever if you wanted to. You don't have to make that determination now. Forever is a long time, and circumstances may change. But I certainly wouldn't want to hold Bitcoin forever because eventually it's going to have zero value. I mean, it has zero value right now, but it has a price. Right, the price of Bitcoin is around $40,000 a coin, maybe a little bit higher, 41, something like that. But its value is zero. I don't care what the price is; it has no value. But just because some idiot is willing to buy it, it has a price. But you can't always count on those idiots being there because eventually they run out of money or they come to their senses, and then the price is going to implode. So with Bitcoin, it's like that old game of musical chairs, right? You can't play the game forever because otherwise the music stops and you're out. You got to have a chair. So you got to get rid of your Bitcoin before the music stops. So, if I were you, I would just sell it all right now, but that's me.
As a Republican, do you endorse the January 6th riot?
First of all, I don't really call it a riot. Maybe it was a protest kind of that went too far. People were not there rioting. They call it insurrection, a coup d'etat. They didn't bring rifles.
Round two is economics and money. And we've answered a couple of them. So this may be a slightly shorter round, but my most successful book that I've written is called Money, and I'm writing a sequel called The Laws of Money. And so I'd love it if you could share what you believe is a fundamental law of money that can't be broken, that everyone needs to know.
Well, money is supposed to be the most liquid and the most marketable commodity. That's what money is by definition. Before we had money, we conducted commerce through barter. So, you traded goods and services, with other people, but you had to pay for the services and goods you bought with the goods and services that you had or that you produced. So if I was a butcher and you were a baker, I wanted some of your bread, I would trade you some of my meat. Well, what if you're a vegetarian and you don't want my meat? Well, I can't get your bread because all I have is meat that you don't want, right? And so it wasn't very efficient. And then, of course, how much meat do I need to give you for a loaf of bread? Or how many loaves of bread do you need to give me for, for a steak? I mean, what's the relative value? It's hard to say. It was very cumbersome. I mean, it worked because that's how people lived until man invented money. And so what money was a commodity that everybody could agree on, that it was universally accepted in exchange for other goods and services. So I could buy your bread and I can pay you in money instead of my meat. And then you could take the money and buy whatever you wanted with it. But the money was also a valuable commodity, like bread or like meat. And so a lot of things, were money, but ultimately metal ended up being the best money, and they made metal into coins. And the best metal for money was gold. And so, over time we learned that gold was the best form of money, and gold functioned as money very efficiently for thousands of years, But eventually, man developed money substitutes, currency, which could circulate, alongside of money, and be a medium of exchange and a unit of account. But the reason that those money substitutes worked is that they were backed by actual money. So paper money, currency, was backed by actual money. So if you had, $100, it was really an IOU for $100 worth of gold that sat in the vault somewhere. And what gave that piece of paper value was the gold that was in that vault backing it up, right? So, and it would function. But 1971, ever since then, we finally cut the last ties that remained to real money and paper, Federal Reserve notes. We now have this fiat monetary system that I think is doomed to fail because it can't work, because what we're using as money is not real money. And so it isn't a real commodity. So if I go to a baker, when I give the baker gold for his bread and he gives me bread for my gold, the baker gets a commodity, a metal, gold that can be used, and I get, bread that I can eat. But when I give the baker money, paper, Federal Reserve notes, fiat for his bread, I get real bread that I can eat. He gets nothing. He gets, piece of paper, has no real value. And eventually it collapses because the government can just create this paper out of thin air as much as it wants, and that's what we've been doing. And eventually the confidence is lost because it's all ultimately a confidence game. Gold has value because it's a metal, because it has unique properties that give it value that we desire. Paper money has value because people think it has value. People think it has value because other people will accept it in exchange for goods and services, so that gives it value. But the only reason people will accept it is because they're confident that other people will accept it. But eventually, the confidence goes, and the currency collapses, and I think that's where we're headed. For most major economies. A lot of minor economies have seen this already. I mean, you can look at Venezuela, right? You can look at Zimbabwe. There's all kinds of, examples of this massive hyperinflation. But there have been lots of examples in more powerful countries, more industrial. Argentina at one point, I think, was the fourth richest country in the world. But it destroyed its currency. I mean, so, you can be a very rich country. I mean, look what happened to Germany and the Reichsmark. I mean, after the First World War, Germany was a rich, powerful country, and they destroyed the currency. So a lot of rich, powerful countries destroy their currency. So it's not going to be unprecedented what's going to happen. I mean, maybe in scale, because I don't think a nation as large as America, the United States, ever destroyed a currency as important as the US dollar, but I think we're going to succeed in doing that.
And then what's the solution to replace fiat currency to go back to a more, back to the fundamentals of money?
Yeah, I think we go back to the type of monetary system that existed before 1971, and maybe even before 1913, which is when we introduced the Federal Reserve. I mean, I don't think governments or countries need central banks. I think on balance, they do more harm than good. So I don't think we need them. But I also don't think governments should try to play the role of central bankers either. I think that money needs to be a creature of the free market, right? Money needs to be produced by, the market, not by the government. And if the government wants money, it needs to tax it and collect it through taxation, right? Legitimately. And that's what we did when we were on gold standards and the money was created privately. The government would buy the gold and turn it into coins and make it into legal tender. That was fine, but it was the free market that decided what money was and that created money and brought it into existence. The government just coined it and established a unit of account and the weights and measures of the money. How much gold was a dollar, how much silver equaled a dollar, and that's what they did. But the gold and silver was created by the free market, by miners who went out and produced the gold. And then if the government wanted gold, it had to levy taxes and collect it from the population. They couldn't just print it into existence the way they do now, so they couldn't run these big deficits. I mean, they could borrow money, but there's certainly a limit to what they could borrow. But there's no limit to what they can print. Although the problem is, if you exceed the limits, you destroy the value of what you're printing, which is where we're headed. But I think we can go back to an honest monetary system. I think it would work great. I mean, it worked great in the past. I think it can work even greater in the future if you marry it to modern technology and use the internet and use blockchain to make it even easier to transact in gold now than it was in the past. I think it'll work extremely well having real money.
Peter, you've said that the system is flawed and we need more capitalism. What does needing more capitalism mean?
Well, it means you need less government. I mean, government is inhibiting capitalism from working. Capitalism will lead to the most optimal allocation of resources, leading to the highest standard of living for the most number of people. That's what capitalism does, and it's great at doing that. It's very efficient. But whenever government gets in the way of the process with regulations and taxes and subsidies and all sorts of things that distort this efficient allocation process, and you end up with a less than optimal allocation of land, labor, capital, so that everybody collectively has a lower standard of living. And so the more we can get government out of the economy and let market forces back in, we are going to have a more prosperous society. Bitcoin was really shoved down everybody's throat and massive money spent to convince people to buy basically nothing, worthless tokens. The real money was getting rid of Bitcoin. The average person who bought Bitcoin in 2021 is way down on that buy because ultimately it doesn't have any value. So a lot of people are going to get wiped out on the way down in crypto.
Let's move on to round three, Peter. Thank you. So as a Republican, do you endorse the January 6th riots?
Well, I mean, I ran as a Republican when I ran for Senate in 2010. So I'm certainly closer to what would be a modern day Republican than I am to a Democrat. But philosophically, I'm more aligned with the Libertarian Party and their ideals. So I'm more of a libertarian in that sense than a Republican. Now, as far as what happened in the Capitol, first of all, I don't really call it a riot. I mean, maybe it was a protest kind of that went too far and went astray, and there probably are a lot of things that agitated that. But, people were not there rioting. I mean, they call it insurrection, a coup d'etat. I mean, they didn't bring rifles. They brought their cell phones, right? They weren't shooting bullets. They were taking selfies. So I don't think it was like, they had any intention of overthrowing the government. There was never a point where there was a danger that they were going to take over the government. And yes, there were some lives lost, which is a very unfortunate tragedy, but that doesn't mean that what happened was an attempted coup or anything of the sort. And I do think that there probably were a lot of people who were at that protest that honestly believed that there was fraud in the election, and they have a right to express that frustration or that opinion. Because, forget about the fact that whether or not there was fraud or not, because I don't even want to get into whether or not there was. But obviously, it's possible that there could be fraud in an election, and if not in this election, there could be fraud in a future election. And what if there is? Right? Well, then the results of the election are not legitimate, and you have to have a process to challenge a fraudulent election. You can't just say, well, we have to accept whatever the government tells us, and you can't go through a process if potentially there was fraud, because then the government is, oh, we can do all the fraud that we want because we've now set a precedent that, well, you can't challenge an election just because you think there was fraud involved. You have to be able to, and But this particular time, and I think we've had lots of challenges to election results. I mean, a lot of times the loser in an election demands a recount. He says he thinks there was fraud. Look into this. Look, okay. I mean, there's a whole process. I mean, because there's an election and they don't certify the results, immediately. So there's time to look into allegations. There's a whole legal process. So, you don't have to just accept at face value the raw vote counts at the initially. But I think there were people that actually thought that there was fraud involved in the election. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But they certainly had a right to express and protest the fact that they held that belief.
Thank you, Peter, for answering that. So what do you think of the direction the Republican Party has taken since 2010 and your Senate run then?
Well, I didn't like the direction it took under Trump. I mean, I didn't necessarily object to the things Trump was saying on the campaign trail, because I largely agreed with a lot of the stuff that he said. He was railing against our trade deficits and the degradation of our industrial base and the incompetence of past presidents and administrations and bad trade deals. And, we were a shadow of our former self, and we needed to make America great again. We needed less government, more freedom. We had too much debt. The Federal Reserve was too political, that they were printing too much money and keeping interest rates artificially low and inflating bubbles. So Trump said a lot of things on the campaign trail that I was saying myself, when I was running in 2010. The problem is, the minute he got elected, he became exactly what he criticized. He was now coming up with fake government numbers, and he was demanding the Fed print more money and artificially lower interest rates, and he was making deficits bigger and increasing government spending, military spending, welfare spending. I mean, he did everything that he criticized prior administrations for doing, and he left the country in worse shape than he found it. That was a big problem, and he steered a lot of the Republicans in the wrong direction, I think. But meanwhile, the Democratic Party has moved even further to the left. Now the Democratic Party is really the Socialist Party. The Republican Party is the Democratic Party. The Democrats are the Socialists. There's nobody really that represents limited government, fiscal responsibility, sound money, stuff like that. The party, that's just a libertarian party, but they're insignificant in the political landscape because they're not going to go anywhere, right? They don't have any representation in Congress, and nor are they likely to get any. So yeah, I don't like what's happened to either party. I don't like what's happened to the Democrats. They're worse than they used to be. The Republicans are worse than they used to be. Of course, now they're a little better now that Biden is president. But, of course, it's disingenuous because you have these Republicans now who are criticizing Biden's spending. Well, where were they when Trump was spending? They're criticizing the inflation that we're having now. Well, we had inflation under Trump. It just wasn't showing up yet in the numbers. But the inflation comes from financing budget deficits by printing money. And that's exactly what we did when Trump was president, yet none of these Republicans had a problem with it. Now, all of a sudden, they got a problem with it, when there's a Democrat. Now they want to talk about, not raising the debt ceiling. Okay, well, why'd you raise it when Trump was president? What's the difference? If you don't like the debt, then don't raise the ceiling. Doesn't matter if a Republican is president, don't raise the ceiling. That was one of my signature issues when I ran in 2010, I wanted to be the vote in the Senate to make sure that the debt limit was not raised. Under any circumstances, I would have filibustered it. I want the government to cut spending. Whenever they get to the debt ceiling discussions, they say, America always pays its bills, so we have to raise the debt ceiling. The reason we have to raise the debt ceiling is because we never pay our bills. We just go into debt instead of paying our bills. I want to stop the debt. I don't want the debt to pile up anymore. I want no more deficit spending, and let's actually deal with our bills. Now, of course, our bills are unpayable. That's why we have to keep borrowing. So we need to deal with that. We need to restructure our debts. We can't repay them. But going deeper into debt is an even bigger problem.
Would you run for office again? You sound quite passionate about this.
I don't know. Never say never, right? But I have no immediate plans to run for anything.
Round 4, Peter. Bitcoin and billionaires. So what do you think of the influence of the big tech companies on the world right now? We might say Apple, Facebook, Amazon, etc. What do you think of their influence on the world?
Well, they obviously have a substantial influence. And again, I think part of that is a function of a cozy relationship that they have with government, special protections that they get from government, from competition. But also, I think they have been among the primary beneficiaries of the Fed monetary policy, which has inflated these asset bubbles and has elevated the value of their stocks. And that has given them undue influence because they can take these overvalued stocks and use them as currency to buy out competitors and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And none of this would be happening in an environment of sound money with much higher interest rates. So, these companies have been the primary beneficiaries. There's obviously been substantial losers as a result of this policy. But these companies are going to bear a pretty large share of the burden when the air comes out of this bubble. So they're gonna get payback eventually when their share prices collapse, and maybe that's already started. We've already seen the beginning of that so far in 2021. Or 2022. It's been a disastrous year already for a lot of these high-flying companies. No earnings or small earnings relative to their prices. So maybe the day of reckoning is close at hand.
So we're back to the Bitcoin question, Peter. I've tried to delay it as long as possible. So you tweeted recently, don't wait for the bubble to deflate completely before recognizing what it was. Just open your eyes and your mind and sell your Bitcoin now while others still have their eyes closed and minds shut. And I think most Januaries you've been sort of, saying, get out of Bitcoin, or many Januaries, and it still seems to be here. So why is it going to go to zero? You've probably said it before, but it's still here. It won't go away.
Yeah, so, Bitcoin's price is about the same as it was a year ago. In fact, relatively soon, probably within the next few days, it will be negative on a year-over-year basis. And you need to ask, why is that? Because in 2021, there really was a record amount of hype surrounding Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Like I've never seen. And not just hype, but massive advertising campaign from all sorts of crypto-related companies that got started up in the IPO SPAC wave of 2021. So, Bitcoin was really shoved down everybody's throat in 2021. Especially look at a network like CNBC, nonstop crypto ads. One ad after another, nonstop throughout the day. And then their list of guests, including all these pumpers from the Bitcoin world and various companies out there touting Bitcoin with pie in the sky forecasts of spectacular price appreciation, and all of the on-air, hosts and they're all agreeing. Nobody is really challenging any of these people, despite how ridiculous their forecasts are, what they're saying. And despite all this positive press, right, and massive money spent to convince people to buy basically nothing, worthless tokens, why didn't the price go up? Because lots of people were buying, right? And you had these institutions, right, come in and start buying Bitcoin. Why didn't all that buying drive up the price? That's because there was somebody else selling, right? The real money was getting rid of Bitcoin in 2021. That was the big opportunity. The average person who bought Bitcoin in 2021 is way down on that buy. Bitcoin got as high as 69,000, and right now it's around 41,000. That's a pretty substantial decline in a few months. But it's still got a long way to go because ultimately it doesn't have any value. It has the perception of value, and because people perceive value where it's not there, they're willing to buy it, and there's a price associated with that perception. And as long as people think they can get rich buying Bitcoin, they'll buy Bitcoin. But when they no longer believe they're going to get rich, they won't buy it. And when they think they're going to get poor, if they keep hodling it, then they're going to sell it. And this is billionaires in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin billionaires bought their Bitcoin a long time ago, right? If you're a billionaire buying Bitcoin today, you're not going to be a billionaire if you buy a lot of Bitcoin. But people became billionaires getting in early, and now they're cashing out. But the people who are buying now are the bag holders. And, the big push was to get the institutions on board. And they may have succeeded to a small degree in 2021, suckering in some institutional money. But I think that after being burned so badly, I think the institutions that put their foot in the water and now see how cold it is, I think they're not going into the pool. I think the price is headed down. And there's a lot of leverage in Bitcoin now that didn't exist in the past, because a lot of people who bought Bitcoin, when it was a lot lower in price, they're sitting on these huge gains, paper gains, and they want to spend some of that wealth. They want to buy a new car, they want to buy a new house, they want to travel. But in order to do that, they'd have to sell their Bitcoin. And they don't want to sell their Bitcoin because they're so greedy, they think it's going to keep going up, and so they don't want to sell. Plus, if they sell, they have to pay a capital gains tax. They don't want to pay that. So a lot of people have just been borrowing against their Bitcoin. They've been taking out loans, and they pledge their Bitcoin as collateral, and now they go out and buy stuff with the money they borrowed. And they didn't have to pay any taxes because they never sold any Bitcoin. Well, here's what's going to happen to those people. Bitcoin is going to crash. Their collateral is going to get sold in a margin forced liquidation because it's no longer worth enough to collateralize the loan. So now they're going to have to sell all their Bitcoin at a lower price. And if they bought it a long time ago, they're still going to have a gain. So now they're going to have to pay a tax too. So a lot of people are going to get wiped out on the way down in crypto. And I think the leverage is going to really accelerate the collapse, because those forced sales happen in a vacuum, right? All of a sudden you got to sell, and whatever the market happens to be is the price that's going to get. Well, what if the buyers aren't there? There's no market makers, there's no specialists, there's no limits, there's nothing. And so Bitcoin can go from 40,000 to 10,000 to 5,000. I mean, in a few hours even, if the bids aren't there. So to try to say that, these billionaires are getting a free ride or they're not paying their fair share, it's complete nonsense. It's because Elizabeth Warren doesn't understand capitalism, doesn't understand how a market works, doesn't even realize how her salary is being paid, because Elizabeth Warren's the one that doesn't pay taxes. She lives off of taxes.
For this bit, I need to read you 3 tweets.
Okay.
So, first off was your Instagram quote, which is, when politicians aim their weapons at the billionaires, they always hit the middle class the hardest. And then another tweet from Dogecoin co-creator, Elon Musk is and always will be a self-absorbed grifter. And then a tweet from Elizabeth Warren, which said, let's change the rigged tax code so the person of the year will actually pay taxes and stop freeloading off everyone else. So I've put those three comments together to maybe have a quick discussion around the attack on billionaires and the fact that they should be paying way more taxes. Are the big tech companies and the billionaires evading and avoiding all taxes? And what's your thought on the big criticism of them?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Elon Musk is going to pay more taxes in 2021 than any American in history ever paid in 1 year. He sold a lot of Tesla stock and is going to get a big tax bill. So to say that he's not paying taxes is just a lie. But of course, billionaires pay a lot of taxes, even if they don't pay them directly. Think about all of the jobs that billionaires create, right? They hire lots of people and pay them money. Well, those people that are earning that money are also paying taxes. And they wouldn't pay those taxes if they didn't have those jobs. So if the billionaires created the jobs, they created the tax base. So all the taxes that are being paid by workers are in effect the result of the businesses created by the employers. So billionaires are responsible for a tremendous amount of tax revenue flowing into the government, right? Also, of course, a lot of people become billionaires by inventing products, coming up with things that make our lives better. And of course, that benefits the government too. And the government collects taxes, right? There's sales taxes. When I want to buy one of these new products that some billionaire invented, the government gets a tax off of that. A lot of jobs get created around these new inventions and better ways to do things. So the billionaires are doing a lot to help the country. In addition to providing governments with lots of tax revenues, they make our lives better. They come up with products and services that we value. And without those billionaires creating those services, we wouldn't have them. Most Americans never invent anything. They never employ anybody. They just go through life consuming what other people produce and collecting paychecks that other people write. So to try to say that, these billionaires are getting a free ride or they're not paying their fair share, it's complete nonsense. It's because Elizabeth Warren doesn't understand capitalism, doesn't understand how a market works, doesn't even realize how her salary is being paid, because Elizabeth Warren's the one that doesn't pay taxes. She lives off of taxes. The taxpayers pay her salary. The fact that she gives some of that money back is irrelevant because she got it all from the government in the first place. So if she gives back a little of what she got, she's still a net recipient of government money. People that work in the private sector are paying in. People working in the public sector are drawing out. So it's the politicians that are getting a free ride, like Elizabeth Warren, not entrepreneurs like Elon Musk. Now I know Musk is a bit of a not the greatest example, because Tesla does get government subsidies, for solar, which I'm opposed to. So he's not the poster boy for the best, free market actor when, he's got so many deals with government for, subsidies to his product. But I don't blame Musk for taking advantage of the subsidies. I blame the government for creating the subsidies that allow him to take advantage of it, because people will take advantage of whatever opportunities they have. The problem is the government should not be in a position to give out those perks, right? So, it's the government's fault, not Elon Musk's fault. But also, of course, if you think about it, if billionaires paid more taxes themselves, right? Let's say, billionaires paid half of what they earned and they sent it to the government, right? So Elizabeth Warren would be very happy that these billionaires were paying these taxes. What would the consequence be for the economy of billionaires sending a lot of their money to the US government, right? Because the consequences would be grave. Not for the billionaires, but for the economy. Because let's say a guy is earning, $100 million a year. And right now he's paying, $20 billion a year, 20 million in taxes. And Elizabeth Warren says, no, you need to pay 50 million in taxes, right? 20 million is not enough. You need to pay 50 million, right? Well, let's say that guy starts paying 50 million instead of 20 million. What is going to change in his life? Is he going to have to reduce his lifestyle? Is he going to have to, not travel as much, not, buy as nice a car, not, do all the things that they do? No. I mean, what's the difference? I mean, most people that earn, let's say, $100 million a year, maybe they're spending $10 million a year, if that, of their $100 million. I mean, that's what they're spending. The rest of it is being invested, right? And so if you raise taxes on somebody that earns that much money, you're not going to reduce the money they spend enjoying their lives. Right? They're going to continue to live a grand life, which is the reward for the income that they're earning and the value that they added to generate that income. What's going to happen is they're going to have to substantially reduce their investments, and maybe to another extent their charitable giving, right? Money that they could have given to charity, they're going to give to the government instead, or money that they could have invested in a business, in capital formation, job creation. That money won't be invested. That money is going to be sent to the government. And so the question is, what is better for the economy? Having a billionaire invest $30 million a year productively in businesses that are producing goods and providing services and improving people's lives and creating employment, or is it better to give that money to the government and have the government spend it? Right? Well, history shows you that it's always better to have the private sector invest money than the government spend money. And so if we turn private sector investment to government spending, we are going to have a lower standard of living. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, look at all the examples, of communist countries where the government spends everything and it's a complete disaster because you have nothing because the government doesn't produce effectively. So we don't want billionaires sending their money to Washington. We want them investing it productively in the economy, rather than have it be squandered by politicians. The tweet that I was referring to too, about when they pretend they're going after billionaires, that's in the infrastructure bill that passed, and I think also in the Build Back Better, but that one didn't pass. But there is a lot of money that they're setting aside for added enforcement at the IRS, right? And supposedly they want to force the billionaires to pay more taxes by more heavily auditing them, right? So they want to beef up IRS audits so we'd have more compliance. And my point was that it's really not the billionaires and the millionaires that they're aiming at, because they are taking advantage, by and large, of legal loopholes or the tax code, and they are, reducing their taxes legally. They're not evading their taxes; they're avoiding their taxes, and that's not illegal. You're allowed to arrange your affairs in a way that minimizes your taxes, and if you take advantage of the laws that are written and that results in lower taxes, well, the government can't get any more money from you when they audit you if you're legally reducing your tax liability. The people who are cheating the most are the middle class, are the working poor. Now, I don't have anything against the middle class. I'm not saying they're inherently bad. What I'm saying is the middle class doesn't have the ability to avoid taxes legally the way the rich do. They earn their money in wages. I mean, they don't have the loopholes. So what middle class people do is they cheat. That's how they limit their taxes. They cheat. They don't report all their income. Let's say they work for cash, right? Somebody pays you in cash for something. You don't report it. You just put it in your pocket. You don't put it on your 1040, right? Or you inflate your deductions. You deduct stuff that really wasn't a business expense, but you just claim it anyway, right? Or you inflate your charitable deductions. You claim you gave money to charities, but you really didn't do it, right? This is happening a lot for the middle class. And one of the reasons they do it is because that's the only way they can make ends meet. They can't afford to pay what they legally owe. The only way they can feed their families and pay their rent is to cheat on their taxes. So they do it, And I'm sure that all of this new money for compliance is going to be used to try to catch the middle class tax cheat, to try to squeeze more money out of them. Because they're not going to get anything really from the rich, because they're legally avoiding their taxes. And if they were cheating, they probably would have caught them. And, people who are very rich, I mean, the stakes are too high. They don't want to cheat on their taxes. It's not worth the risk, especially when they have so many legal ways to minimize their taxes. But even when you legally minimize your taxes, I still think they're too high. I still would like to see a country where everybody pays less taxes. But in order to do that, we need a much smaller government, and which is what I'm in favor of. I want to reduce the size of government so it's a smaller burden on the economy, so that everybody can be relieved of the burden of paying for that government.
What's the best advice you've ever received, Peter?
Well, the best advice I probably ever got was to buy Bitcoin when it was really cheap, but I didn't do it.
So, Peter, we're going to do the round 5, quick fire and fun in a moment. But I'd like to talk for a couple of minutes about your books and your podcast. I've really enjoyed this so far. So thank you very much for being so giving. We've just got a few minutes left because these will be 10-second answers. Could you tell us about your podcast, where we can go, and what's the main sort of theme of it?
Yeah, well, it's the Peter Schiff Show podcast. You can listen to it on schiffradio.com. You can also go to YouTube. The Schiff Report is my YouTube channel. I think I'm getting close to 500,000 subscribers, so more people are hearing about me.
Wow.
But I generally do maybe 2 podcasts a week, sometimes 3, sometimes more, depending on what's going on and how much time I have. But I talk about economics, I talk about politics, I talk about the markets. I think I bring a rather fresh perspective, a point of view that's not often heard on mainstream media outlets. So I think it's very important that people listen on a regular basis, whether they ultimately follow my investment advice or not. I mean, I think to the extent that people have money, they should follow my advice. But if you don't have money, you should at least understand what's going on. And spread the word. Get your friends to listen too. It's not, we got to get more people to know what's really happening, because the government is using our ignorance against us. And so the more people I can help educate, the harder it will be for the government to fool us.
Thank you, Peter. And then if you could pick one of your books. So we mentioned a few of them before. So we have got Crash Proof 2.0. How an economy grows and why it crashes. All this will go in the show notes. We'll put it at the end on the edit. And then did you say Real Crash was one of them as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just going to start with one book, you might as well start with the most recent. Now, I haven't written a book in a while. I think the Real Crash revised edition, which just had some extra material, came out in 2013. So it's been quite a number of years since I've written a book. It's basically I've been updating the books on my podcast. So I've been communicating through that medium rather than writing additional books. But that one is the most recent, and I think it has the most material, especially when it comes to the solutions, because that book I write about a lot about what the government needs to do in the aftermath of the crash, to put us on a more solid foundation. So a lot of people, are interested in what the solutions are. Not, hey, Peter, yes, you've pointed out the problem, but what do we do? So there's a lot more solutions in the Real Crash than in my prior book. So I would start with that book and then work backwards if you want to read more, which I would hope people would want to do once they read that one.
Thank you, Peter. So this quick fire and fun round, ideally 10 to 15 second answers, obviously, however you want to play it. But Peter, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, maybe probably the biggest risk is starting a business. That's probably the biggest risk that most people take.
What's the best advice you've ever received, Peter?
Wow. Gotta try to think about that one. Well, the best advice I probably ever got was to buy Bitcoin when it was really cheap, but I didn't do it. And I don't have to necessarily take the advice. Because first, when you asked the question, I was thinking about what's the best advice that I took. But actually, it's advice that I didn't take. I got some really good advice early on to buy it.
Peter, what's the worst advice you ever received?
The worst advice, probably to buy Bitcoin too, but you know, but no, I've probably gotten a lot of bad advice. You know, some of it I've ignored, not all of it.
I think I know the answer to this, but it'd still be good to ask it. And I did a poll on my Facebook page, and it was a huge landslide of a vote. But would you rather give 1 billion of capital to be allocated to Elon Musk or the government, and why?
Well, I mean, obviously Elon Musk, despite the fact that he allocated some money to Bitcoin, right? That was a mistake that he made. And so, you know, but I trust Elon Musk's judgment far more than I trust a politician. But I wouldn't just give, you know, I'm not just giving you money. I mean, you're talking about investing alongside him or investing in a company. I mean, I wouldn't buy Tesla stock right now because it's so overpriced. So that's different. But if I was going to hire somebody as an asset manager, or if somebody came to me with a business idea, you know, whether it was, you know, someone in government or someone in the private sector like Elon Musk, say, hey, I've got a business I want to start. You know, who would I rather back? Who would I rather invest with? I would rather, you know, invest with a proven entrepreneur who's done something. I mean, obviously, you know, somebody in politics might be able to use their connections to try to somehow advance the success of their enterprise. Maybe not in the marketplace, but maybe get some government contracts or something like that. I mean, maybe a government, a congresswoman or former, you know, congressman or woman can come to me and say, hey, I've got this plan for a business and I'm going to get all kinds of government contracts because I've got all these connections and we'll be able to make a lot of money, you know, ripping off the taxpayer, right? They might be able to be successful in that respect because they're able to play on the influence that they have and the friends and contacts they have in government. But as far as an actual profitable business that would succeed in the free market, I mean, very few politicians have the skill set to actually make that happen. I'd much rather invest with a proven entrepreneur. Were you talking about giving the money to government to just give it away? Or, you know, I mean, it's like where would the money be more beneficial to society? And if I gave it to a businessman to invest, or if I gave it to a politician to spend, is that what you meant?
Yeah, well, all this talk about let's tax billionaires loads of money, therefore it's going to the government. Who?
Oh yeah, so let me just give you a different answer then, because that's basically if that's what you meant by the question. So look, if my choice was to invest $1 billion, if I had $1 billion lying around that I needed to invest, and my goal was not necessarily to enrich myself, but to do something good for society, do I think I would help society more by giving a guy like Elon Musk $1 billion to invest in growing a business, in plant and equipment, in research and development? Do I think that would be better for society than just sending $1 billion to Washington so they can divvy it up and send out checks to their friends and, you know, the voters to buy their votes and to reassure their reelection? I mean, sure, if people got checks from the government in the short run, yeah, that'd be great, right? They'd go out and they'd buy stuff and they'd have something they didn't have. But then the money is blown and it's gone and it's like an adrenaline shot and it wears off. But if I invest the money, or somebody invests my money in the private sector, and we produce capital that is able to generate goods and services into the future to raise living standards over the long run, then that's much better for society to invest in growing the stock of capital and creating new businesses and new research and development than just having a party and just blowing a bunch of money going out and buying stuff. And of course, if Americans got a bunch of cash to buy stuff, what would they do? They'd go buy stuff made in China, which is what we did with the stimulus money, right? How is that helping our economy to go out and buy more Chinese-made products? I mean, it's good in the short run because you get a new thing that you didn't have, but then the money is gone and the product depreciates and then you've destroyed all the capital. So much better off for entrepreneurs to invest money than Washington to spend it.
In 15 seconds or less, Peter, what's the future of money?
I think the future of money is the past of money. I think we're going forward to the gold standard. That's what's worked successfully in the past, and that's what will work in the future. Maybe it will be modernized, so maybe the internet and blockchain will play a part in the future gold standard, but we're going back to sound money.
Peter, is tax theft?
Well, I think taxation, if it is not for the general welfare, basically amounts to theft. If the government is taking money from one taxpayer and simply redirecting it to another, you're taking money from somebody against their will and giving it to somebody else who didn't earn it. I think that's theft. And I think if taxation is done illegally, right, which is the case in the United States, I think a lot of taxation violates the U.S. Constitution. I think the government is acting outside the law. And when you take property outside the law, it's theft. And so in many cases, taxation does equal theft.
What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought?
Oh, a house?
Are you allowed to say how much?
Well, a lot. But you know, I can sell it for a lot more than I paid, that's for sure. I'm living in a big real estate bubble here in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
But you know, a house is probably the most expensive thing that most people buy. Although I guess you got the billionaires and they buy these super yachts for hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's probably the most expensive thing that anybody buys. But I don't own one of those.
Is money the root of all evil?
No. I think it's the other way around. Maybe it's the root of all good. I think that's what Ayn Rand said. But you know, it's the pursuit of money. People forget that how do you earn money? I earn money by enriching my fellow man, by coming up with ways to please other people. I have to invent goods, products that other people want to buy. And I've got to make them cheaper than my competitors. I mean, I have to win people's money, right? If I'm a businessman, I don't put a gun to my customer's head. My customers have to voluntarily give me their money because they value the goods and services I'm providing them more than the money they're paying me. And so to the extent that I've acquired money, it's because I've helped satisfy all of these needs and desires of all these people. And so you want people out there pursuing money because they get money by making your lives better. You know, we're all talking about, hey, cancer. Do we want somebody to cure cancer? Sure. You know, do you mind that the person that cures cancer gets rich? No. Why should you care if the guy that cured cancer gets rich? I want the guy that cures cancer to get rich because that's why somebody's going to cure cancer, because they want to get rich. And they know if they cure cancer, they can get rich, right? We want people to get rich doing things that improve our lives because that's how we get them to do it. Because when you take those incentives away and you try to give the government monopoly on that, then nothing gets cured, nothing gets done because politicians don't invent things. They don't create things. They just redistribute what other people create.
Would you choose, Peter, 10 million cash or 10 million followers on your YouTube channel and Peter Schiff show, and why?
You know, I haven't done the calculation as to how much 10 million followers might be worth. I mean, it depends on who's following me. I guess if it was 10 million bots that really didn't even give a damn what I had to say, but it would depend on the followers. Because if I had 10 million of the right followers, it'd be worth a lot more than $10 million. Because I think I could succeed in monetizing those followers to a much higher degree than that cash. Of course, if I took the 10 million cash, I wouldn't leave it in cash very long. I would quickly turn it into something real. I'd invest it because I wouldn't want to let inflation wipe it out.
I've had so much fun on this chat interview, Peter. Thanks so much for doing it. I'm really grateful. Where can we follow you? Give us you're on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. What are your usernames so we can follow you?
Well, I mean, it's Peter Schiff. So on Twitter, I'm Peter Schiff. I finally got verified last year, so I got the check mark. So you'll see me. I got about 600,000 followers and change, 625,000 followers on Twitter. But I'm also Peter Schiff on Instagram and Facebook. Verified there as well. Not as many followers. I haven't been putting out as much content there. And the YouTube channel, again, I said, is Peter Schiff. So just, keep, using, looking for my name. There's some fake Peter Schiffs out there, but they won't have nearly as many followers. So just ignore all those and just look for the verified account or the one that has a lot of followers, at least in relation to those. But go to my website. Go to Europe Pacific Capital's website, europac.com. Go to my asset management company website. That's up on above my shoulder, epacfunds.com, to learn about the funds that I manage. Talk to the reps that work for me and helping to work with my clients and building their portfolios and managing their money and helping them manage their own portfolios, getting money out of U.S. assets, overpriced U.S. assets in an overpriced currency, into value and dividend-paying stocks around the world and currencies that are going to appreciate. Look for gold and silver. Schiff Gold is the gold company that I'm working with. I started it. I founded the company. Schiffgold.com is where you'll find it. But we've got the best prices on gold and silver bullion, and no one's going to try to upsell you into numismatics or so-called rare coins that you don't really need. Unfortunately, a lot of the gold and silver dealers are doing that these days, and it's a shame that happens, but it will never happen at Schiff Gold. And then, look for my books on Amazon. I have some books on my own website, schiffbooks.com, but you can pretty much find most of my stuff somewhere on Amazon or eBay. I mean, if it's not new, you can pick up a used copy from somebody.
Peter, thanks a lot for taking time today. I know we went a little bit more than the allotted time, but I'm really grateful. Thank you so much.